بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله وكفاه والصلاة والسلام على رسوله المصطفى وعلى عباده الذين ارتضى ومن بهداهم اهتدى وبآثار أهل المدينة اقتفى وبعد. السلام الله عليكم. We reached in the previous dars, I take it we covered the makruhat and we reached, I'll just take us to, no, actually went beyond mandubat. We reached the mufsidat to salah. That's correct, yeah? No?
We were at the chapter of Imam. Yeah.
Well, right. Imamat. Excellent. So, the chapter of Imam, and this is an interesting. All right, absolutely. Yep. We did that. We did the mufsidat. We did after that sujood al-sahw in reasonable depth, and then we've reached babun fil imama. Right, this is quite interesting today, and we have to, and we will stop at times to kind of elaborate on why some things have been made conditions or recommendations for imama. I want us to, when we're understanding this, have a broad perspective as well of, like, take into understanding a historical context as well. So don't just think, like, oh, why are they coming up with this, or this sounds weird. You've got to take a look at the whole historical Muslim societies and everything. So, right, babun fil imama. Now, does somebody want to read, or I see Doc is avoiding eye contact. Qasim seems to have his book in front of him. Have you got the text? Right, have you got your text? Are you?
I've given mine to Doc as well.
All right, cool. Guys, okay. Do bring your texts with you. Oh, you don't have one? No, it should have been emailed to everybody. Everybody should have an email type of copy of the text and stuff like this. Because you see, when you're learning, you should be kind of like reading something. You should be, you're using more than one type of medium to retain. So you're reading, you're listening. There's the contextual type of thing, and also it's that commitment to learning as well. Because it shouldn't be like, it should be casual in its learning, but it should be serious in its kind of like commitment. You see what I mean? So if it's just like, I'll just sit there, just write on a tissue paper, I'll just write on a post-it note, and then obviously remember, that's your commitment to learning. That's demonstrative of how you are thinking and taking your studies. All right, so next dars, bring your texts. Naam. Right, okay. شكرا. تفضل شيخنا.
باب في الإمامة. ومن شروط الإمام أن يكون ذكرا مسلما عاقلا بالغا عالما بما لا تصح الصلاة إلا به من قراءة وفقه.
شكرا. Right, now from the conditions of the Imam is that he must be, and it's going to go through a few, that first it says male. Now this is in leading a mixed congregation. There are differences. Even within the Maliki madhab, for example, some transmitted from Imam Malik by Ibn Ayman al-Qurtubi and others, that women can lead women, but this is talking about leading either a male congregation or a mixed congregation. So na'am, so the person he should be male, Muslim. That's like a duh moment, like you're not obviously Muslim. Aqil, what they mean by that is somebody capable of, that has mental capacity. Balighan, pubescent, so no children leading the salah. Aliman bima la tasihhu salah illa bih. The person must have the knowledge of what is necessary to make a salah valid, or what invalidates a salah, that he knows or she knows about the fara'id of salah. They know about the mufsidat, they know about ahkam sujood al-sahw, they know about these type of things, about istikhlaf, they know about imama, they know these type of rules, which are not necessarily complex, by the way, but it just means that they know them. And he says min qira'atin wa fiqh. So the person doesn't just know the rules, but they also know how to recite as well. So if they are to recite, if they are to recite, if they are to recite, they wouldn't mix up the pronunciation. They wouldn't kind of like radically, almost kind of like mutate the words and change the meanings, and they wouldn't be doing like reading a dal as a bod and doing all these type of things. And that, I mean, that's a different mas'ala. Is the salah valid if a person does stuff like that? We're talking about they shouldn't really be the imam. Okay? Naam.
فإن اقتديت بإمام ثم تبين لك أنه كافر أو امرأة أو خنثى مشكل أو مجنون أو فاسق بجارحة أو صبي لم يبلغ الحلم أو محدث تعمد الحدث بطلت صلاتك ووجبت عليك الإعادة.
Shukran. Right, if you were to follow behind an imam and then it came to your awareness that, oh, this person was actually a non-Muslim. I don't know what they were doing leading salah. Right. Better than most Muslims in a way, but if that came to your awareness, and I don't mean by that, just to clarify here, we're not talking about really like deviants and stuff like this. We're talking about actual kafir, not just people calling people kafir. Right, so an actual kafir, or if it came to your knowledge that that was actually a woman, that would be more interesting. Oh, the woman just led the salah, nobody realized. Or a khuntha mushkil, which is like a hermaphrodite or somebody. The khuntha mushkil is interesting for our day and age, in a sense, because this is the historical reference. This is historically talking about like eunuchs and so on, or people possessing kind of like both genders or not too certain where they are. But a khuntha mushkil historically was the one that possessed both genders. So it wasn't just a khuntha was one that was, they weren't too sure or something like this, but one that had both, like a hermaphrodite, was a khuntha mushkil. Why that's interesting, I'm just saying it's interesting in the sense that I know there's all this media hype recently as well of that the soldier, whoever he was, that kind of had a sex change and then converted to Islam. And there's all this talk about, well, what does Islam have to say about this type of stuff? And to the extent some people questioning whether his or her, whatever we want to refer to them, or them two, or huma, as the thing is that, but to the extent that some people saying that their Islam is invalid, which I find that totally absurd as a statement, that their Islam is invalid. Their Islam would be perfectly valid. I mean, the action that they've undertaken is what it would be questioned. But first of all, in that particular case, it would have been undertaken before they actually came to Islam. So it was from their non-Muslim past. So these type of things, and sometimes the discussion which people really get into is so shocking in a way that people will be like, some people are like, oh, what, you know, the person was born a man will always be like this and will always kind of group this person with this and refuse to take certain things into context. That, wait a minute, but okay, whatever, whether it's whether it's kind of like surgically enhanced, whether there's kind of like medical intervention to make a person switch genders or whatever, what you have now, how do you deal with it? And that is the question. And you could not simply say that that person was a man. That simply would not even, that just would not make sense. I mean, that, and I actually witnessed some kind of discussions myself on this, which are really strange, and people so adamant on, and there's almost like an obsession that people have about this topic anyway, this type of, the whole, and I don't see why they've made it into such a, I mean, I can understand that obviously it's an intriguing topic, I can understand that. But there's almost an obsession in this day and age recently around this whole thing of like homosexuality and so on, and the way some of like people of knowledge are kind of dealing with it, and or whether you just want to say the Muslim forums are kind of, when historically all this type of stuff was in our texts from a different angle. So like the khuntha, for example, was something that was in the historical texts. I mean, since the time of the Salaf, it's nothing new that was like, whoa. So I think it's interesting that at the very least that, look, okay, they've mentioned these things. And people can make references to the historical type of what we've got. Although I'd add there that I think, having said that, I think even I can, I mean, from my own reading, right, that I don't think there's been too much written on the topic of khunsas. There has been a certain amount historically. You would have thought there would have been a lot more actually, since the fact that they were a common type of phenomena during the historical ages, especially since they used to be, many of them used to work within the royal courtyards and had like royal posts almost, like, or like at least positions of like high administration and stuff like this to an extent. So you'd think that due to this presence and this type of it wasn't, I mean, the fact that they were part and parcel of the historical Muslim societies, that there was a lot more written about them. Because but I mean, maybe, you know, further research will show more. But
Can I just ask about what exactly is a khunfa? Is it a hermaphrodite or a eunuch? Is that different?
Yeah, okay, I see what you mean. I mean, historically, I think they kind of grouped the khuntha as like, that was like the generic, which included all of them.
Okay.
A khuntha mushkil was a hermaphrodite that like possessed both. That's why he says here khuntha mushkil, the one that possessed both type of organs. But then there were ones which were kind of like, they weren't really sure in between, or like whether they were a result of certain issues, like could be like eunuchs and stuff like that. So, but yeah, if that makes sense. Naam, or majnoonun, or if somebody was insane, or fasiq bijariha. You know this fasiq. All right, we might as well just delete that one. The thing is that now, what that means is like somebody that commits obviously sins. Now, realistically speaking, yeah, people, you see, we have like we're entrusted with a tradition, so we convey the tradition as it's been kind of passed on to us. And people have been doing that obviously for centuries. So when they've been told certain things, they convey them as they've been told. But in the real world, you see, that sometimes textbook and the real world are not necessarily the same type of thing. So in the real world,
But there's a mufti.
no, exactly. So in the real world, this type of stuff wouldn't really, I mean, it would depend, but it wouldn't really invalidate the salah. But it would depend on should the person be the imam or not. On what is the fisq of which we're speaking about. Because, you see, what is this type of, because it depends contextually, because some things in some societies may appear as immense fisq, and in other societies they may be almost like the norm. So, and they may have a difference of opinion about them as well. So, an example could be, let's say if somebody was to say something like music. Now, if somebody listened to music, what type of an issue is that? Taking into consideration that many ulama have considered music to be permissible, but yet many others haven't. Now, if in some societies you can imagine, like let's say a society in which there is no music going on in that particular town or that particular village. Now, if somebody all of a sudden just blasts his or her, I don't know, like speakers and stereo, and they may be seen as, what type of a fasiq is this? Where has this fasiq come from? Now that in a very metropolitan society may be just what everybody is doing. It may be seen as like, you know, a person could make better use of their time, but it's perhaps not seen any greater than that. So everything has to be contextually kind of digested. Okay, so the fisq thing, I think you really have to understand what type of fisq, in what society, and in our society, in this day and age, it's one of those situations where, you know, like where Imam Malik was once asked about some people who are in a particular land where almost all the maksab, all where they earn from is haram almost. And like, what should they do? And Imam Malik just responded that, look, let them kind of engage in the least of it, being like like that which is the least of the, because obviously there's going to be categories of, so if somebody's a murderer, for example, that's not going to be the same as somebody listening to music or somebody, do you see what I mean? So there's going to be degrees. So, and it's interesting that Imam Malik in that fatwa didn't say, oh, they had to migrate. So it shows the understanding of the fuqaha as well. So na'am, and then it mentions, or a child lam yablugh, who's hasn't reached puberty yet, al-hulm. Now this once again, I'm aware that the other madhabs do allow for, let's say, non-adults to lead the salah, so minors, they could lead the salah and stuff like that. Really, that's, you can understand why. I mean, there is a huge debate, but the point is, it is allowed in some of the madhabs, but in the Maliki madhab, it isn't allowed generally. Neither in the Hanafi madhab generally is it allowed. Or muhdith ta'ammad al-hadath, or somebody who doesn't have ritual purity, but intentionally. Never says, I ain't gonna do wudu, I'm gonna lead the salah. Right? So intentionally, right, that would invalidate the salah, and you must repeat your salah. Naam.
Mufti, quick question. When he clarifies the fisq by saying bijariha, does he mean that it has to be a fisq which is like injuring someone else? What does he mean there?
No, jariha generally is the limbs.
I was talking about the limbs.
Like meaning like an actual, like the person is an actual perpetrator of some of like actual like type of crimes, and like they're actually like he obviously being the Imam has actually gone and done things, and it's known. And you see, you can understand why. Once again, it depends on the society. You see, there are a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that إِجْعَلُوا أَئِمَّتَكُمْ خِيَارَكُمْ, that make your imams the best of you. So you can understand why the imam should be the ideal person. But we're talking about invalidating. So I don't believe that it would invalidate the salah. Neither, and the reason they've put it is they've kind of just passed it on with the tradition. You know, like sometimes they have something, and to be fair, I don't think many of the ulama actually mention it as an invalidating factor, although he has here, but you'll see in other texts, they mention it more as it shouldn't be the imam. Right, so, does that make sense? Naam.
ويستحب سلامة الأعضاء للإمام وتكره إمامة الأقطع والأشل وصاحب السلس ومن به قرح للصحيح.
Shukran. Right, now the thing is here he's going to say about what is recommended for an imam, and he says that the imam, what is recommended is that the person has is free from physical defects. And he says it's discouraged to have a person as an imam that may be an amputee, or a person that is kind of paralyzed, or a Bedouin, or and the reason
Why is a Bedouin equated with a disabled person?
Because there's some categories, there's some similarities there. You see. Now the thing is that when you have to remember that why is this discouraged? It's not because, you know, it's one of those situations where you're going to say to the person, it's not you. No, it's not you, it's me. It's one of those. It's one of those situations where you're going to say to the imam that you're going to say to this guy, or this, let's say, obviously it's discussed an amputee or like a person like this or disabled or whatever. You're not going to say, I mean, it's not your fault. It's not like that. But what it is you have to understand the concept of imama, and especially in historical societies. The imam was the person which kind of held a community together in a way. Historically, nowadays we don't play, like imams in a community don't necessarily play that type of a role. Historically, they played a very important role. They were like key people, like whether you want to say, they were constantly in whatever spotlight you want to imagine. Now, it was also they became, not intentionally, but they carried the potential to also allow division to occur. If you understand what I'm saying. Like, meaning that the imam could be the person that makes, or not he, but maybe using him, other people could break the community. So a person could be like, oh, we don't want to pray behind this imam. Not that they really hate the imam, but they use something as an excuse, and then what they start doing is saying, we're going to have our own jama'ah. And then this becomes like, it could carry other alternative type of ulterior motives. It could have political motives. It could have other things. It could just be to split, fragment the community. It could be. So it had it had many other dimensions to it. The other thing was, the Muslim communities historically were kind of represented by the imam as well. So let's say sometimes when people came from, like, let's say, I don't know, a person of prestige, or there was about to be an important meeting, or there was going to be something which affected that town or that village or that city, some of the key people that were involved in meetings or going to speak to us would have been the imams of the place. Now you can imagine that what people don't want as well is the Muslims to be kind of dissed historically. As in, I know it's not the person's fault, but they don't want other people to kind of say, oh, look, you know, look at the imams, their leaders are disabled and their leaders are like this and the lead. Do you see what I mean? And whereas really, although that's not the person's fault, but they're trying to kind of put down the entire Muslim community by just trying to be just stupid in using some type of physical defects that an imam may have. This is why they wanted the imams to be like very eligible type of people that would kind of fit the role as well.
You know, when you say things like that,
yeah,
that's like, you know,
it's not very PC in this.
It's not about PC.
Oh, okay.
It's like a good. I understand the justification.
Yeah. Okay.
It sounds strong.
Okay. The justification doesn't sound strong.
No, because really, maybe it's today's reality, but
okay.
In terms of like,
I think it would, you know, in a way, because when you think about it, in societies historically, if you said, "Where's the imam?"
Yeah.
and along comes a dwarf or somebody. Let's just say, I'm not trying to be funny, but let's just say somebody came in like this, like severely disabled or something. People would I think even in today's society, they may not say it, but I think they will kind of mock it. Just being people.
Yeah.
And they won't respect. This is another key thing. You see, it's about warranting, like kind of like demanding respect.
So, but you're putting like, the reason I'm saying, you're putting illah's reasoning behind it, like they won't respect it. What if they do respect it?
But
what's the issue?
no, there's no issue. This is what we're saying to the guy. We're saying to the guy in the beginning, this isn't you. It's them. Right? It's not your fault. It's them. Right. So.
More like a socio-cultural.
But I seriously do believe that it would, in many societies, still not demand respect from people. Now, whether people want to be politically, because of the politically correct culture, don't want to own up to it, that I admit that people won't own up to it. But you know, when Imam Malik said, historically, when he said that, oh, like a person of knowledge should, obviously, I mean, he was emphasizing the physique, where he said that person should kind of like he should have a very strong posture, he should be like this, he should be like, he said that I've seen, he said many a times that knowledge is downtrodden or not given respect because the one carrying it is just a feeble type of person who doesn't kind of, his aura doesn't kind of like demand respect from people. Now, that is unfortunately, it's sad but true. It's the unfortunate reality where people, you know, where somebody has a presence, the thing they're carrying has a presence. Like, you know, a feeble person may be just as good and better than somebody that has. This is why, you know, the hadith that al-mu'minu al-qawi ahabbu ila Allah min al-mu'min al-da'if. This was not talking about iman, because that was just obvious, that saying better iman is more beloved to Allah than less iman is like an obvious statement. Saying that the strong believer was more beloved than the weak believer. It wasn't because the weak believer was a bad person or something like this. The hadith and the ulama that comment on this will say that it's because the strong person or person who has a presence, what he's carrying ends up having a presence. So it's the same thing with whether you're going to look at today, you know, when you look at, I know there's like people that other people look up to. you'll note that a lot of these people have something about them. Like whether you're going to look at celebrities today, you're going to look at other people, they have something about their presence. Not always, I know, because of the whole media thing as well can play a role, but people, the presence makes a huge impact, and where that's going to be downplayed, right? The Sharia has just kind of said, look, listen, this person shouldn't be the Imam. It's not, once again, it's not the person's fault, and you're going to see some other crazy examples as well coming up. So just to keep that in mind.
I understand that, but there's a difference between, say, like some physicality differences, and maybe even amputees in some respects with modern, what can you say, aesthetics and things like that.
Like Oscar,
wasn't it? If you shoot people, get away with it. I mean, well, I'm just saying, but like there are people that
it could outrun the congregation.
so they
and those that catch up, we can shoot them.
And what it is, so they will still have presence.
No, but I'm not saying everybody would disrespect a person mentally. Astaghfirullah, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that many people would, in their kind of hearts, have this type of thing like, oh, is that the Imam?
It's the minor process it used to have.
Yeah. No, I know, but this is exactly, I mean, all of these things that we're going to see now, that we're kind of like, the whole thing is what we try and grasp is this social. And you'll see that some they won't have an issue with and they'll mention. But, okay, Jayid. The Bedouin, why the Bedouin? That was an interesting one. The Bedouin, because, you know, what it is that they just live in a different world. Like, people who are very, like, village folk. Like, no offense to Norwich here. Right, but the people who are like village folk, they don't truly understand people like the city people. They're not always, but they have like a weird mentality. So, and don't get me wrong, sometimes people in cities are like that as well. They've got like weird mentalities, but it's all about that weird type of mentality. And once again, it comes back to the social setting. You can't, like some of these people, like they look, like it or don't like it, but they're backwards in their mentality and they're kind of a bit difficult to understand the congregation that they're meant to be representing. So I know that may not sound too, does that sound too messed up?
No, it sounds good.
Well, Doc just said that sounds good. So for
Not being elitist.
Doc carries some. Right, okay, now. And the incontinence, obviously, you understand why that's medical. Man bihi quruh. Obviously, if somebody was kind of had all these type of like, I don't know what you'd call them, but if they had like pus and this and that kind of pouring out of him and these wounds, or if somebody had, obviously that makes sense anyway. Now this is an interesting one. Imamatu man yukrah. That somebody somebody who the people don't like shouldn't be the Imam. And this is really, and it is based on a hadith. That there's a hadith from Abdullah ibn Amr. The Prophet ﷺ said, ثلاثة لا يقبل الله منهم صلاة. And it mentions that من تقدم قوما وهم له كارهون. That who's amongst them was one person who he kind of goes ahead to become the Imam and the people don't like him. Because once again, it's about the Imam is a role which is meant to be holding together the community. So, especially historically, and where people resent you, then you should not be the Imam. Naam.
ويكره للخص والأغلب والمأبون ومجهول الحال وولد الزنا والعبد في الفريضة أن يكون إماما راكبا بخلاف النافلة.
Right.
إنها لا تكره بواحد منهم.
Shukran. Right, okay, once again, now he's going to go through some other strange, and you can understand why. So they will say that the imama of a person who's been castrated. Now, obviously, and then they say somebody who hasn't been circumcised, and then they mention somebody that's had or been involved in homosexuality. And the reason they mention these things, once again, is the same thing, that a person would be discredited. And it would reflect upon the congregation. Majhulul hal, Majhulul hal isn't really that bad. in this day and age, it may be a lot more common. Obviously, we're in these type of urbanized societies where people don't know people. But historically, generally, everybody knew, or most people knew most people within a community. And where there was somebody who we just did not know who they were. So somebody without a past. Why is that person discouraged? Just because, once again, it could become a mold, it could become a spark for fitna. Somebody could start certain rumors, you know, in small places, small towns, people talking, saying, oh, this person was like in the past, oh, you know, I heard about this person, you know where this person really came from, you know why they left the other place. So, and the Imam is supposed to be somebody who has that, once again, that role. Well, this is an interesting one. وَوَلَدُ الزِّنَا, the illegitimate child, which is definitely not the child's fault. But once again, and I know Imam Malik, I think, is in the Muwatta, that he does transmit where somebody is kind of removed by, I think, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, and when Imam Malik has to explain why that person was removed, and he says that it was because he was an illegitimate, like he was somebody who they don't know his nasab or his lineage, don't know who his father was, and so on. In this day and age, obviously, I don't think in these societies, I don't think these things are really brought into question. I don't think most people know most people's parents anyway, especially when it comes to adults. Most people don't know other adults' parents. Generally, in a society and community, historically, where lineage was such a big thing amongst the Arabs, and then there's somebody who's illegitimate, it carries that huge type of, a huge, not just more than a blemish really, it's almost like, I know it's not the person's fault, but it's something that people insulted each other with. And it's that thing of, once again, holding the community together and having that role. They mentioned a slave in the obligatory prayers. Once again, same type of thing because of that social status. Naam. Oh, it does mention, by the way, if this is for the obligatory prayers. If it was a nafil prayer, then there isn't an issue. نعم.
وتجوز إمامة الأعمى والمخالف في الفروع والعنين والمجلتم إلا أن يشتد الجذام ويضر بمن خلفه فينحى عنهم.
نعم.
ويجوز علو المأموم على إمامه ولو بسطح ولا يجوز للإمام العلو على مأمومه إلا بالشيء اليسير كالشبر ونحوه.
شكرا. Right, now they mention here that however it is permissible to have the following, even though these are also considered defects and stuff, but like a blind person. You see, it may be interesting that you may ask why, they allowed, like the first, there was almost a very different view towards somebody like an amputee, we said, or towards somebody with paralysis and so on, and not to the blind person. So there is a distinct, although that's also a disability. Now the thing being that, you see, it comes back to the social construct, the social understanding. Historically as well, there's almost been a tradition in many societies of people with kind of awe, with that type of wisdom, who happen to be this also blind, and they happen to be this type of wise person. And you get these type of things that you have these social constructs historically as well, where people did not see that. They saw it as like a disability, but they didn't see it as a defect. Now, this is without a value judgment. I'm not passing a value judgment. I'm not saying what they did was good or bad in either case. I'm just saying it as it was. Like, for example, this is how people kind of saw things. Why they saw things like that, whether it's good or whether it's bad, that we're not discussing. We're just saying that historically there was this thing of where people, they didn't necessarily see like blind as socially kind of degraded. They saw them as, a disability, but they saw it as like there were still many people who were wise and they were like so on, and they had this type of role. And also the fact that many people historically, as they reached old age, became blind. And that may have just been things like cataracts or stuff like this, which today you could possibly remove. But I mean, historically, you read about many people that once they reached a slight old age, they became blind. And you think, well, the type of, the commonness of it shows that it couldn't have been actual blindness. I mean, Allahu A'lam, but it doesn't seem like it was actual. It seems like it was more just a condition to kind of, which obviously in the day and age they struggled with. So it was much more commonplace. Right, so that also, if somebody's from a different madhab, I mean, it's fine, you can pray behind the person, it's not an issue. Go on then, you know. It's like, well, if they're Hanafi or if they're Shafi'i, and
Is that recommended?
this isn't under the recommended. No, I'm joking. It's completely permissible.
It's not their fault.
It's not. It's one of those that it's not you. It's don't worry about it. See what they group them with. See what comes next. Right. Okay. That's a disclaimer. I did not mean that. I know it's being recorded. So, right.
Because other schools of thought do have an issue with it.
Yeah, other schools of thought sometimes have an issue. Now, the Malikis are chilled out. They say, look, listen, guys, relax. It's not their fault. They're like this. And we shouldn't be holding madhab differences against them. And even if they do things which we consider invalid in our fiqh, but yet we still pray behind them absolutely fine, and they can pray behind us. And unlike some schools of thought, sometimes they get a bit weird on this mas'ala. But generally, you have to remember that, look, everybody is trying to follow the Sunnah, and we have to respect that, okay? So that's that. Then they've mentioned straight immediately after that, mentioned the impotent person. Right? Well, see, once again, and then they've mentioned straight after that leprosy. Now, once again, they're talking about things which perhaps were obviously medical issues, but maybe, you know, commonplace to an extent amongst certain societies. So they're kind of seeing it as that shouldn't be something, wasn't something either that shouldn't be held against the person, or it wasn't in those societies. So they're seeing this as this is not a makruh aspect of an imam. Although I'm shocked at how they would know this about all the imams and all the people, but that's another discussion. Right, so obviously they mention if the leprosy is so disturbing, then obviously that's an issue. Now, the congregation, when you're praying salah, can be on a more elevated place in relation to the imam, but not on the contrary. So the imam cannot be on an elevated type of podium in contrast to the congregation. He could if many of the congregation were on there as well, but he couldn't exclusively be on an elevated position. Okay, and there is several type of this traditions and ahadith and athar, and you've got one where Ammar ibn Yasir is leading some people, and he's praying on this place which is like almost like a podium, like slightly elevated, and the people are praying beneath really. And Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman comes along, and whilst Ammar is in his salah, he takes him by the hand and kind of leads him down, and he continues his salah. And then when he finishes, he says to him, that Hudhayfa says that I heard the Prophet ﷺ say, إِذَا أَمَّ الرَّجُلُ الْقَوْمِ فَلَا يَقُمْ فِي مَكَانٍ أَرْفَعَ مِنْ مَقَامِهِمْ أَوْ نَحْوَ ذَلِكَ. And he says that I heard the Prophet ﷺ say, if a person leads a people, let him not stand in on an elevated platform. And Ammar says that, you know, and that is why I followed you when you kind of led me down, like meaning that, you know, I knew you were doing this upon guidance. And so and that's in Abu Dawood and Bayhaqi. But so the point is that, you see, it's to show that the imam must always be amongst the people and from them. He can't be an elite. He can't have this type of elitist type of attitude of the imam stands on a platform way above other people. So sorry about that, Doc. When you're gonna be an imam, you're gonna have to stand with the common folk, okay, with all the migrant workers. So right now, the thing is that, and this is why the imam cannot stand inside the mihrab either. You know, where you have the mihrab and people are praying, the imam cannot stand inside them. What he can do is be outside, and if, like, let's say, I don't know, when he went into sujood, part of him may have reached inside the mihrab, that is permissible, but the person shouldn't be exclusively inside the mihrab with the congregation outside. Shouldn't work like that. Okay. Na'am.
وإن قصد الإمام المأموم بعلوه الكبر بطلت صلاته.
To the extent that he's saying, look, if a person if an imam said, I'm exclusive, yo, I got my own platform, and if he stands on something like that, salah would actually become invalid to that extent. نعم.
من شروط المأموم أن ينوي الاقتداء بإمامه ولا يشترط في حق الإمام أن ينوي الإمامة إلا في 4 مسائل في صلاة الجمعة وصلاة الجمع وصلاة الخوف وصلاة الاستخلاف وزاد بعضهم فضل الجماعة على الخلاف في ذلك.
Shukran. Right. Once again, that from the conditions of the ma'moom is the one being led by the imam. So he is the follower, sometimes referred to as al-muqtadi as well, somebody who follows the imam. The muqtadi or the ma'moom must intend to be praying behind the imam. The imam does not have to intend that he is an imam. And there's many hadith for that. For example, the Prophet ﷺ, when he was staying with Maymuna radiallahu anha, and Ibn Abbas comes, I believe the hadith is in Sahih Muslim, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu turns up, he sees in the night that the Prophet's got up to pray, so he just, once the Prophet has begun his salah, he comes and says, I just came and stood besides the Prophet on the left and just started praying behind him. And the Prophet ﷺ took my hand and he took me round to the right and kind of made me stand there and continued. So that's the dalil. Obviously the Prophet ﷺ began the salah without being an imam, and the salah is valid if you are turned into an imam. Right, so then some people have said with the exception of four or five masail, and that is where imama is necessary. That's why you can see, so they mention Salatul Jum'ah, because the imam is a necessary component for Jum'ah. You can't do that on your own. Salatul Jama'. If you're combining, this once again depends on what you're combining for and where and how. Salatul Khawf, if it's the prayer, it's kind of out of fear and so on. Salatul Istikhlaf. Now this, Istikhlaf, by the way, is where the imam for some reason has to leave the salah and go. Now, in such a case, he would kind of advise somebody to kind of step forward, and that is called istikhlaf. And according to many ulama, and we'll go into more detail later on, like for example, Ibn Abd al-Hakam from the Maliki madhab, that is the only way. That if the people decide to break off on their own, the salah becomes invalid. Whereas there is some difference. Ibn al-Qasim does say that, look, people can break off on their own and do do their own. But ideally, they all agree that there should be istikhlaf. This is why the Prophet ﷺ said, لِيَلِنِي مِنْكُمْ أُولُو النُّهَى وَالْأَحْلَامِ. He said that let those ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُم ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُم ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُم. And the thing is that the Prophet ﷺ said, let those who are people of knowledge and people of kind of foresight, and let them stand behind me in salah. And why the Prophet ﷺ said this, like they don't say just stand, like immediately follow behind me in salah, as in like be the ones right behind me, the row behind me, and then those who follow them, then those who follow them. And why the Prophet ﷺ said that is because, one, it shows social status as well. It was important as well, although I don't think that was necessarily the primary thing, but it shows it is important sometimes to, you see, there's things are, as human beings things are dynamic and complex, but there is protocol within society, and Islam does recognize as well social status. It does so the Prophet ﷺ was with the people as one of the people, to the extent that when outsiders came, they used to say we couldn't tell which one the Prophet was. He wasn't like distinguished with a crown or a special type of imama on his head, and like I'm the, this is it, and everybody's around me in a way like they're doing. It wasn't like that. Like they couldn't tell. He was just chilled out with them. Now, to the extent that when on many occasions when some ambassadors came, and this is what they said we couldn't figure out which one was the Prophet, because obviously they don't know what the Prophet looked like, but they couldn't see like this type of entourage thing going on, so they couldn't suss it out. Now, that is on one hand you've got that. On the other hand, it doesn't mean that you do away with maratib either. It doesn't mean that there is no thing as status. the Prophet ﷺ still had, like, unquestionably had an absolute unique maqam and status. So at the same time, it doesn't mean now that, oh, because you're like one of the, oh, it means everything's a joke and you just take the mick, or you do this or you do that. It doesn't mean that either. So likewise, status and things, they serve a social function. So this is why so for example, behind the Prophet ﷺ, people like Abu Bakr, like Umar, like these people would stand there because they were to become the future leadership. And people had to see that as well. People had to recognize as well, who would we go to, who are those people with that commitment, who are those people. So that is one angle as well. The other angle is, which we can't undermine as well, is of salah. If the Prophet ﷺ had to leave salah, the people that would step forward would be those who had the most wisdom and the most knowledge about Islam and salah and so on.
Because Maghrib's getting earlier and earlier. We're worried about it after we finish, might be very, very late. So should we just break the Maghrib and carry on with it?
Yeah, we can do. Should we do that? Okay, I'll tell you what, let's...
We'll do for next week, inshallah. We'll pray Maghrib first, because it's going to be about 7 time. So we'll pray Maghrib and then we'll pray.
Wait a minute, or where have we... I think if we finish off Imama, which we're almost about to just do, and then we could just quickly do Maghrib, and then just do whatever on Jummah quickly, and then Q&A. What do you think? Okay. Because I know Ustad wa Shaykhana Khalifa definitely is on the other qawl of the waqt not being muwassa. So inshallah, out of respect and honor for our Shaykh. Right, so these masail where the salah, where the imama is necessary, it's very obvious, it's important that the imam has an intention. That makes sense, which makes sense in a way. So obviously if it's Jummah, the imam is necessary, so a necessary component, therefore he must have an intention, is the imam. Naam.
ويستحب تقديم السلطان في الإمامة ثم رب المنزل ثم المستأجر يقدم على المالك ثم الزائد في الفقه ثم الزائد في الحديث ثم الزائد في القراءة ثم الزائد في العبادة ثم المسن في الإسلام ثم ذو النسب ثم جميل الخلق ثم جميل الخلق ثم حسن اللباس ومن كان له حق في التقديم في الإمامة ونقص عن درجتها كرب الدار وإن كان عبدا أو امرأة أو غير عالم مثلا فإنه يستحب له أن يستنيب من هو أعلم منه والله أعلم.
Right, okay, now they're just talking about, it comes back to the thing which I just touched up on, social status and protocol and stuff like this, and how you kind of show etiquettes of recognition when it comes to certain people. So they're saying, okay, so you've got a bunch of people now, and they're going to choose who should the imam be. So they say, okay, they begin with, as he's begun with here, he says that first of all, if the sultan happened to be there, you would tell him to go first, which is a bit, I mean, it's obvious. If there was a king in your presence, then I think you'd be a bit upset if somebody said, don't worry about it, I got this, step back. And so I think he'd be a bit like, I thought I was king. But the point being that, so they mentioned that, okay, if the king was there, let him go first. ثُمَّ رَبُّ الْمَنْزِلِ, then the person who owns the house or wherever you're praying. Then they say, what about if it, and it's interesting, what about if it's a rented out property? So you've got the owner there and you've got the tenant. Right, it's an interesting mas'ala, because you know what's more interesting? It's not the mas'ala, but it's the way of thinking that's interesting. That they say that the tenant is given the precedence, because, and the preference, because he is the one who has the ownership right now. The ownership in terms of usage. Right, so, and then the actual owner. Now he then mentions, then the one who knows most in fiqh. Now people like Khattabi and so on, this, by the way, this has come in, these type of things have come in like athar and some ahadith, and so these things are being transmitted Okay, and he seems to be transmitting many of them just like as he's found them. So he's found a tradition, he's transmitting it. Many of the ulama, Khattabi and his Ma'alim al-Sunnah, and those people will say that, look, although fiqh comes towards the end here, this is not saying that fiqh should be considered at the end. It's just the way it came in that tradition, and these people have just transmitted it like that. I mean, he's not necessarily talking about Ashmawi, but he's talking about other people who have commented on that or passed on this type of athar where this is mentioned. And then he says, and the one who knows more in hadith, then the one who knows more in recitation, and then in worship. And this is not hierarchically kind of explained, but it's just saying, look, if you had a group of people and the one who knew the most about Islam, in terms of fiqh, would be given preference. It doesn't mean that they have to lead, by the way. It's just talking about preference. So obviously, if you had, let's say there's a place and there's a scholar and there's people who, let's say, don't know about the salah and everything. Now it's salah time. And they say, well, don't worry about it. You know, one of them jumps in the front and says, oh, I got this. And he doesn't even know how to pray salah properly and this and that. That could be, obviously, it could be kind of disparaging. It could be like this. And it's not the way to do things. It doesn't recognize that type of status. That's what it's saying. Likewise, if there was a person who was a qari, he had the recitation, he had this, and somebody else says, no, I'll go, and he starts like, Allahu Akbar, and you know, and they say, and they, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, and you know, like, and people actually do, they actually read like this, and so the point is that this, you shouldn't do that because you've got somebody who can recite properly. Why is that person not going, is not being given preference or precedence in that sense? Also, a person who's known for his worship, a person, they've also said, al-musinnu fil Islam, like imagine there was just a group of converts and there was somebody who had spent so many years in Islam. Then he would obviously be given that precedence, meaning he's been learning for so many years. This is ideally speaking. You remember, there could be that, for example, it's not saying it has to be like this, but ideally, because it could be that some person has entered Islam for 25 years now, but hasn't learned anything. Somebody's entered Islam for 6 months and learned so much. So it could be like that. Then it mentions Dhu Nasab. Now this is strange because he mentions the one of a lineage. Right now, Ibn Abd al-Barr writes here that he says that there is no mention in any athar whatsoever. He says, ليس في شيء من الآثار ما يدل على مراعاة نسب في الإمامة. He says, وإنما فيها الدلالة على الفقه والقراءة والصلاح في الدين. That he says there is no mention in any type of text, Islamic text, like meaning by that hadith and so on, about lineage. He says it's only about understanding of the deen, it's about the recitation, having knowledge of the book, and it's about piety. It's not about
wouldn't they take it from things like al-A'immah min Quraysh?
This is what some of them do say, that, oh, we're talking about al-A'immah min Quraysh. But generally, that hadith was more talking about leadership than it was about salah. But broadly, I mean, that is probably where they have taken it from, al-A'immah min Quraysh. But the madhab of Malik was one that generally didn't give lineage, it didn't really give it much attention. It didn't really recognize. It was really a madhab of the people. It wasn't it wasn't something that was all about, although it did, I can't say it didn't have political type of angles to it, because obviously it governed a huge part of the Muslim world, therefore it was obviously involved in politics. But I think it was a madhab which truly represented the people, as in it wasn't just about leadership. Because you see from the word go, the madhab is all about like the people all the way. And when it comes to stuff like lineage, and where other madhabs have this thing about, oh, anybody who's from the family of the Prophet ﷺ, they kind of almost give them a different status. And you see in the Maliki madhab, they almost refuse to recognize that to that extent, almost. Like, although some of them have been a bit more perhaps open to it. But you see like almost Imam Malik, in many of his things, many of his responses when he's asked about, when you say, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad, upon the al, who is the al? And Imam Malik very clearly says, because people obviously say the al is the family of the Prophet. Imam Malik said no. He says very clearly the Al are his followers. He says Atba' Muhammad. And you see that the madhab of Malik was one of the first to kind of renounce this whole concept of, kafa'a in marriage, which was the equilibrium, if you like, of marriage. How is it set? That when you look at two partners, like they're looking at each other, husband and wife, what has to be there for a requirement? And people would obviously say Islam, they would say obviously people would recommend piety, recommend stuff like this. Other madhabs have said nasab, lineage, they've put that in there and said, well, like for example, they've said Arabs are better than non-Arabs. Amongst them, the Hanafi madhab says this. So it says Arabs are better than non-Arabs on a lineage status. And they say Quraysh are better than Arabs on a lineage status. And then from Quraysh, they'll say Bani Hashim are better. So they have this thing, and therefore they consider like a Hashemiya, for example, or a Hashemi, man or a woman, or a Sayyid today, not to be of equal status of a normal Muslim. So they would say, yes, if the family was all happy and they all wanted to get married, then it's okay. But let's say if a guy and a girl want to get married, and let's say supposedly she was Hashemiya and he was just a non-Arab. Now, even if they were happy, but if the family of, let's say the girl, some of the family members were not too happy with the marriage, the marriage would just be dissolved. And there's a difference amongst them. Would it be instantaneously broken, or would it be broken later on, or how would it be broken? But the thing is just based on nasab alone. And one of the earliest scholars to kind of really speak out against a lot of this was actually Imam Malik. And this is why you even see, and obviously, and people after him as well, a lot of the muhaddithin as well. So you'll see like Imam Bukhari also takes a similar thing and kind of pushes the whole Maliki understanding of this, that look, people are all equal, and the Prophet ﷺ said this, and you can't kind of well, yeah. People are all equal unless it's imama. No, I'm joking. So, but that's an interesting concept anyway, that nasab doesn't really play a role in imama, truly speaking. And then he mentions things like people who are jamil al-khalq, people who look good. And you think, you might think, why is he saying that? And then people
of good character.
And then he puts that before. No, but this isn't necessarily on hierarchical. But yeah, then he mentions then people of good character, and then people who dress good. And the reason being they mention in a lot of the commentaries.
Oh, that's weak, isn't it?
Say that again.
Isn't that weak?
Ah, it is indeed, Ya Aba Layla. All right. So the thing is, the reason they say is because istimalatul qulub wa likathratil jama'. They say because people draw people to them, and once again it comes back to that social role. And as unfortunate as it is, but obviously if a person doesn't have certain things going for him, let's say, then I'm just saying, to be fair, even psychologists today, there's been a lot of studies done. Like I remember when I had to read up on some research that had been done on things like juries and how they convict people. Now, believe it or not, there was a huge discrepancies on those that they found good looking. That they found the people that were like the defendants that were rated as reasonably like above average looking were usually more prone to being let off as non-guilty than those who were not really, or just seen as average or below average. And this was actual studies that people actually went out and funded and conducted, and this is available. I mean, you can research stuff like this. So once again, it's sad, but it's true that it does kind of win over people a lot easier.
Less bad looking people do more crime.
It's our protest to society. Right. Anyway, so I did not say that. A disclaimer once again, since this is being recorded. Right. So it's just talking about referring people. It says, what if a person has one or more different qualities in them? So for example, somebody might have fiqh, but he doesn't happen to be the person who owns the house. They just say, look, listen, if you happen to be like the person who owns the house, or you happen to be, but there's somebody else there. But you should just tell that person to do it. A good example as well, like if a person has reasonable understanding of salah and he has good recitation, you should tell the person to lead salah. Like rather than sometimes a person could have a very good, like they could be scholars sometimes, you know, you pray in, like if you lived in Pakistan and places like that, there'll be so many ulama, but so many of them really suffer from the whole tajweed, the absence of tajweed, shall I say. And so really making them lead just because they're ulama, it's a bit burdensome on the salah. Do you see what I mean? So as long as there's other people who have got recitation and they've got understanding of the salah, then they should perhaps lead. Wallahu a'lam. That brings us up to Salatul Jum'ah. Yeah.
Memorization or anything like that.
That's a good point that they didn't mention that. That comes with the qira'ah. The thing was that if you see, the understanding was that there are many people who have done hifz, but just having done hifz doesn't necessitate an understanding of salah. So, because usually in the Muslim world, a lot of children do hifz. So people, like kids have sometimes done hifz and they're only like 8, 9 years old. But yet they wouldn't know, like they can read salah, but they wouldn't know, for example, sujood al-sahw, or what if they mess something up, or how do I fix salah. And so this is why they don't bring that in. As long as a person knows enough to lead the salah, that's fine. It doesn't have to be a hafiz of the Quran.
Did they also say those narrations, the way the companions understood having knowledge of the Quran was actually...
Yeah, I mean, this is the argument, because the Shafi'iyya tend to say that a person who should lead is aqra'uhum, whereas the Hanafiya and the Maliki usually say afqahum, the more knowledgeable should lead. And the debate is that, well, in some of the hadith it mentions aqra'uhum should lead, and the one who can recite the most, and they interpret it to be like the Maliki and the Hanafiya, that this was referring to the Sahaba, and the ones amongst them who were most aqra were the most knowledgeable. That's why. So, whereas in our day and age, that's not necessarily the case. Now, with that said, let's quickly do our salah, and then we'll inshallah continue with Salatul Jum'ah. Is that okay? All right, ahlan wa sahlan. Right, we've reached Salatul Jum'ah. Right, so let's try and take a look at this, bi'idhnillah. See if we can cover as much of it as possible. نعم أستاذنا إن شاء الله اقرأ.
باب صلاة الجمعة. وصلاة الجمعة فرض على الأعيان، ولها شروط وجوب وأركان وآداب وأعذار تبيح التخلف عنها.
Shukran. Jum'ah, which is an individual obligation upon people. So it's something which is not fardu kifaya, it is not something, a communal obligation, something each and every one of us really has to pray, given the conditions which will come shortly. So just to make that clear, I know there have been, by the way, I know there have been some transmissions sometimes by some students of Imam Malik, like Ibn Wahab, transmitting it as Sunnah, but I mean, from what I've come across, generally the Maliki are unanimous that he did not mean by it like a sunnah. He meant by either they're saying that he was referring to the fact that he had perhaps, I mean, some had tried to say maybe it meant clearly established by the sunnah, or others had said that maybe he meant by that it was sunnah, either he was speaking about those people who it was not obligatory for, or better still, what some people have said, that he sometimes uses loosely the word sunnah to refer to fard. But generally, just to clarify, it is an obligation upon people. It's not less than that. It has conditions, it has so it will have a shurut, it will have arkan, pillars within it, it will have etiquettes, it will have also excuses for which it can be missed, and we'll kind of take a look at those now. So now,
فأما شروط وجوبها فسبعة: الإسلام والبلوغ والعقل والذكورية والحرية والإقامة والصحة.
Right, once again, do take into consideration the historical context, and people have to be kind of astute about all of that, you see, as we're learning. So it's conditions of obligation, to make it obligatory, not validity, obligation, are 7. Islam, pubescence, that person is at least baligh, they've reached puberty. Al-aql, that they've got mental capacity. Dhukuriya, male. Hurriya, historically that they were free, that they were not a slave. Wal-iqama, residence, so they're not a traveler. Was-sihha, and health, so they're not ill. So you're already getting some idea of who is excused by taking a look at those conditions there. Now.
وأما أركانها فخمسة. الأول المسجد الذي يكون جامعا. الثاني الجماعة وليس لهم حد عند مالك بل لا بد أن تكون جماعة تتقرى بهم قرية. ورجح بعض أئمتنا أنها تجوز ب12 رجلا باقين لسلامها. الثالث الخطبة الأولى وهي ركن على الصحيح وكذلك الخطبة الثانية على المشهور.
Shukran. Right, the first is going to go through, we're going to go through now the arkan, the pillars, the necessary conditions for Jum'ah to be valid. One, see, you know the first condition they mention, which is a masjid, which is a jami' masjid. So when you say jami', it is a masjid, by the way, for those of you learning Arabic. And if you add a ta marbuta at the end, jami'ah, then it is a university. Okay, so just so you got that clear. So sometimes there are places, even in the Muslim world, where they will say this is a jami'ah this, so, and they will say al-jami' of this as well. So you might have, for example, the jami' of Zaytuna and the jami'ah of Zaytuna, and so you'll have places which are referring to the masjid. You'll have places which are referring to the actual university of the thing as well, especially in this now in this day and age. The masjid, which is a jami', and what that means, the masjid that usually has the 5 prayers held there, including the Jum'ah. That place is a masjid. That place has a sanctity to it, and masjids have their special ahkam. So there's certain things you can and cannot do in a masjid. Also, traditionally, a masjid was waqf lillah. So a masjid was something which was like endowed for the sake of Allah. Now that's it. It was, now nobody could repossess that area. Traditionally, obviously in these countries it wouldn't really work like that, but traditionally it was a waqf lillah. So if we said this was a masjid, now nobody could now tomorrow turn this not into a masjid. This would be kind of waqf. It would be what is it? A hubus. So, and I know there is ikhtilaf between some madhabs and stuff, but generally that is the understanding. So, and I know based upon maslahah, people will at times, and they have historically, and they continue to do so, which is permissible, where sometimes they need to expand a masjid and they can't because of the vicinity, and therefore they have to set up the masjid in another place in place of this. So they have to kind of do a swap. And that does happen, but generally a masjid, it wasn't meant to be like that. It was meant to, once it's this Masjid al-Jami' being a condition for Jum'ah is a bit of a, like the Malikiya have got a huge, you know, they've got some exclamation, which in my understanding, some unnecessary exclamation marks on this, but they've got some exclamation marks on this, where they will say that this is like, you know, this is an absolute must. And the evidence for it is that, I mean, there's 2 things. I mean, one, that the Prophet ﷺ generally always prayed in a masjid. So there's that understanding. The second, there is also an athar, which I'll find it at some point. But there is an athar as well, which I think Ibn Hazm and Ibn Hajar said was sahih, that la jum'ata illa fi masjidin jami', or something like this. And it was kind of commented on by these ulama, and they said it was sahih. But the point is, generally, people have challenged this notion. Even from within the Malikiyya, but within the Malikiyya it's been very few who have, but some have. Amongst them, for example, Ibn Rushd al-Hafid, the grandson in his Bidat al-Mujtahid, where he speaks on this. He has an interesting discussion and does say, look, listen, you have to sometimes look at all the evidences, and it becomes a bit difficult at times. And then also amongst them, Ibn al-Faras in his tafsir of the Quran also has an argument questioning this ruling of the masjid being a shart for Jum'ah. We're not saying that it's not a good thing. Obviously it's a good thing and it should be there, but we're talking about, is it a condition? In my understanding, it's not a condition, although many of the Malikiya have transmitted it. I mean, some haven't, some have argued against it, but many have transmitted it as a condition. And I feel that that is a bit, not only is it, it's not substantiated. So evidentially speaking, it's not fully there. There ain't clear evidences that Jummah would be invalid if it wasn't in a masjid. Secondly, all madhabs, including the Maliki madhab, will agree, and including all those ulama will agree, that if the masjid became so rampacked, for example, those who continue to pray outside, their Jummah is valid. So they would all agree on the fact that if the masjid was so busy, and obviously the rows start extending, go outside the masjid. So those people technically not praying in the masjid, praying outside, but their Jummah is still valid because based on need and necessity and maslahah. And so based on that understanding as well, that in our climate, in the type of country where we are, in our type of setting, where Jummah is quite often prayed by people who are not in a masjid, like they might be at work praying Jummah, they might be in schools, Jummah in colleges, in universities, and these places are not masjidun jami'. So, yeah, well, it's still valid. Okay, so don't need to sweat it, inshallah, too much. It's not too much of a problem. Just to kind of clarify that. Naam. The second was a jama'ah, a congregation is needed. This is interesting because a congregation is definitely needed, but there is no set number. And even the Malikiya refused, Imam Malik refused to set a number for it. They asked him how much and he refused to say a number. Now, some people say whatever constitutes a jama'ah. Some people have said 40 people, some people have said 30 people, some people have said 12. I know the Hanafiya take it down to just 2 or 3. But there is a hadith that when the caravan came to Medina and the Prophet ﷺ was in the khutbah of Jummah, that many of the people walked out to see the caravan, that they were so kind of fascinated, and only 12 people remained. So, and that's why some people said, oh, so 12 is the minimum number, which is such a, I don't know where they get their reasoning from, but that is interesting though. That is interesting. What is seriously interesting isn't just the number aspect, which is obviously bizarrely interesting from a different aspect, but what's interesting is the fact that happens and how. Because remember, and the hadith, it's a verse of the Quran, وَتَرَكُوكَ قَائِمًا قُلْ مَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ خَيْرٌ مِّنَ اللَّهْوِ وَمِنَ التِّجَارَةِ. That, they went out for this lahu and tijara, and they left you standing. The verse says, they left you standing. And tell them that what Allah has is better than this lahu wa tijara and this commerce and so on. But they were not kind of like condemned. They were not, the reaction of the Prophet ﷺ was not reactionary, so to speak. It wasn't like think about it, this isn't a nobody, this is the Prophet ﷺ. And this isn't just any salah, this is the Jummah as it's kind of, in its early days, as it's become such a key thing, to the extent that, according to certain understandings, the Muslims, they renamed Jummah. According to one variation, that it was al-Jumu'ah, it was in which people became gathered, and therefore, so that was kind of renamed by the Muslims. So this is a key thing. It becomes the Eid of the Muslims. It becomes the Christians with their Sunday and the Saturday, the Sabbath, and now it becomes and here's the Prophet ﷺ addressing them, and along comes what? A caravan with drums and music or whatever, and they go bought this stuff, and everybody's like, I'm doing one. And they got up and walked off. And in fact, ran off. So it's quite, you can understand how, just trying to sketch it mentally, that what was actually going on. Yet, you know, like what could have easily been said is, astaghfirullah, you guys don't value Islam, you don't value this. Because ultimately, think about it, this is almost symbolic of Islam, isn't it? The Jum'ah. So, you don't value Islam, you don't value this, you don't value the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you don't, you know, is this how you behave in a khutbah? And so, which is actually considered, you're not allowed to, you know, you're not allowed to actually be talking in a khutbah. And so, although some people may say the talking rule came later on, but the point is that this is how the Prophet ﷺ did not go off on one, you know, about them. He didn't, like, he dealt with it with just hilm and wisdom. And that is an interesting element, that it wasn't, you see, it showed that this was human nature, that people naturally are eager for lahu, for entertainment. People naturally will go to profit and money and, you know, in the sense of commerce, and they've been waiting, and all of a sudden, you know, the caravan only comes, let's say, twice a year, and it's here now. So what if it's Jummah? But it's showing you about keeping it real. But like it or don't like it, it's human nature. People are going to be like that. So, like, you can either have the hard line, well, then you're all apostates then, or a type of, or you're just real with people as well. So there's many interesting lessons to learn from the seerah in that thing alone. So na'am. Yep. So I mean, and he mentions that some of the ulama have said that maybe 12 people based on that, but really there's no set number for the congregation of Jum'ah. Na'am. Al-khutbah, all right. The third condition, al-khutbah al-ula, وهي ركن على الصحيح, that the Jum'ah must have a khutbah. Okay, the khutbah is something, it's a speech, a short type of speech, a sermon, which must have certain sermon-related elements to it, i.e., it must have the praise of Allah, sending blessings upon, or, you know, something very short, some admonition, something, you know, even if it's like, Ya ayyuhan nas ittaqullah, you know, people fear Allah, or do this, or any brief admonition, something. Okay, this is a condition of Jummah to the extent that if nobody can do the khutbah, Jummah is dropped. Is that necessary? And I know there's some difference of opinion there. Majishun from the Malikiya, from Imam Malik's student, does say that Jummah is not a condition of, khutbah is not a condition of Jummah, he says Sunnah, but he's isolated in that opinion. Generally, it is a condition. Okay, so just to clarify, and it must be in Arabic. So if you are going to do, you know, like if you're going to split it, and if you're going to do a speech in English, then either you can do your speech first. The best way would be is either do your speech completely first, and then just do like a ritual khutbah at least, which is in Arabic. Or worst case, you'd kind of like, I suppose, you're going to have to bring it, worst case, you're going to bring it into your khutbah, but make sure at least one of them is entirely just in Arabic, and it's, so even if it's after the second sitting, but you just keep like a brief thing just in Arabic where you've said, because the khutbah must be in Arabic. There's no two ways about that. But the question here is, what if you've got a huge speech in the middle of it? Okay, fair enough. But ideally, it should be done as then a speech and then just do your khutbah. Okay, do it like that. I mean, that's in these type of countries where people are going to give a speech in, let's say, English, or you're going to speak in a different... After the Iqamah, do your speech? Oh, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
You don't want to do the English speech and then do the adhan and then do the Arabic, or, you know, you say the speech first. There's no way you have a mixed one here.
Yeah.
You have the adhan.
Yeah, all right, fair enough. I mean, whether you do it before or after the adhan, I wouldn't really I wouldn't say there's a religious prescriptive type of ruling on when to do it, but just do it like that. Just split it, but don't do one with no Arabic in there. It must be Arabic in there.
One has to be only in Arabic.
Because Allah says, فَاسْعَوْا إِلَىٰ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ, and hasten to the dhikr of Allah. And therefore, khutbah is two-dimensional. It has two dimensions to it. One is that it is admonishing and giving, it is a remembrance and so on, and the other that it is a ritual worship. Now, which one preponderates? Which one gives the... So, for example, the adhan. The adhan is two-dimensional. It has one, it has a meaning to it. You're saying, you're telling everybody Allah is great, hayya ala salah, come to salah, come to do this. And the second is it's ritualistic. It's a ritual. Which one preponderates over the other? So in the adhan, clearly the ritual element preponderates. So even if everybody here couldn't understand what hayya ala salah meant, could I now change it to English just to make you all understand? The answer is no, I can't, because the ritual element of it preponderates and outweighs the type of, the meaning side of it that I'm trying to call people as well. Now it's become a symbol for calling people. So regardless of whether you understand it or not. So likewise, the Jummah khutbah has the same debate. And I know some ulama disagree. They feel it's got the other element to it. They feel that it's got more of, perhaps the other one should preponderate. But in the Maliki madhab, because Allah calls it His dhikr, فَسَعُوا إِلَىٰ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ, it's His remembrance, therefore it's that ritual side of it.
Some Ahl-al-Hadith scholars are quite critical of doing it before the khutbah, because there's a hadith apparently about
doing the khutbah before the khutbah?
Doing the English khutbah before the...
I would probably say that is the best way probably to do it. I would personally, that's my personal understanding.
What about the athar, which kind of...
Well, in the athar, obviously, they never used to do it in English, did they? So they never used to say, okay, then he finished his English speech, and then he began the khutbah.
English,
there's hadith, but there's having a lesson before.
Yeah, no bayan before the Jummah khutbah.
Right. Well, no, in the sense, I've not come across that, Allahu A'lam. I mean, okay, you're saying that, but if you said that to me, that there's no bayan before the khutbah, what I would immediately understand from that is that this type of, A, that it was completely unnecessary. 2, it may become a ritual. 3, it may become a cause for fitna and division. That you almost got like a khutbah before a khutbah, and some people now attending this one, some people attending that one. Obviously, and where are you addressing? You're addressing a people who all understand Arabic. So it doesn't make sense, like whatever you got to say, you can say it in the khutbah. Like you don't have to kind of be waiting for... Obviously, we're presented with a dilemma where people don't understand Arabic. But yeah, you're right. Now, for once, they're in the masjid. Right, so which they ain't going to be in till next week. So now you've got them, so you might as well say something to them. So in that case, you can't say in Arabic because they won't understand what you're saying. So now you might as well just say a speech in English. Say whatever you got to say. And do you know why that's good? I'll tell you why that's good as well. Because that way, if it's not your khutbah, you can just be free and casual in it. Like, like if you're going to talk about, I don't know, whatever you're going to talk about, and it's less burdensome for them as well. Because think about it, during the khutbah, you're not allowed to talk. Now, if this is your khutbah, and they're sitting there, you're doing this, knocking this out for like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and they've got to sit still. And like, they're not really meant to be doing things like talking to each other or doing stuff. And so I think it makes absolute sense that you do what you say. It's casual, like it's a speech, but it doesn't carry the rulings of khutbah. So therefore, even if they spoke, it's not a problem. Even if you got casual, it's not a problem. So imagine you're cracking jokes or you're doing something in a Jummah khutbah. That's okay, because it's not really the khutbah yet, it's just the speech. And when the khutbah begins, even if you keep that ritualistic, like so what, you've conveyed it, they ain't going to understand it anyway. But, I mean, even if they do, but I'm not trying to be like pessimistic, but like what I'm trying to say is even if they do, but it's a dhikr, you've mentioned it, you've praised Allah, you've said this, you've read some verses, you've done some admonishing. Now, there you go, you get up and do Jummah. I just think that's more pragmatic. It makes sense. Rather than, because people are cracking jokes, they're doing this, or they're talking about all sorts of events and talking about this. Is that really the khutbah? Like people, but at the same time, I understand the need to talk to people. So they might say, oh God, just look at what was on the news this week. I say, check this out, what's going on, does this make sense? And people, like imagine they're talking about this stuff. In a way, that's absolutely fair because they need to talk to people about it, and now's the only time they get to talk to them. But at the same time, it doesn't really befit the context of a khutbah which is quite ritual.
But what is the aim of the actual khutbah on Friday then? Is it just to be a little admonishment?
I think it's it's got those things, that's what I mentioned, it's got both dimensions. Now, the question would be which one preponderates if you have to compromise one at the cost of the other.
Because doesn't khutbah mean a speech? Doesn't it seem like the preponderant aspect is the actually addressing people?
Yes and no. Like, if that was the case, because yes, from the angle of when we see that is what you should, that is a khutbah, yeah, like a sermon, like in the sense that you're addressing people. But then in a normal address, you see, you got to remember what comes with it. It has a certain extraordinary sanctity. Like you're not allowed to talk. If you talk, that you do away with the reward of your Jum'ah. Like that now shows that, wait a minute, this has now got a huge element of worship in it. It's not just about speech. So in that case, you shouldn't be too casual then. Because like if you're too casual, then obviously it's going to encourage people to talk. It's going to go, like if you, like let's say I crack a joke, I'm encouraging you to laugh, which obviously that's why I'm cracked the joke, so you're going to find it funny. There's nothing wrong with that, but in a setting of like where you're not allowed to talk and you're not allowed to tell somebody off, and so it doesn't befit that setting. So this is what we spoke about, protocols and etiquettes for certain things.
You know the Prophet's sermons, when you talk about khutbah, they actually mention, they're the Arabic texts, and then you can translate, you get books.
Yeah,
they're different, they're not the same.
No, they're different, but
sometimes they address certain issues like Ramadan.
Yeah, no, they address, but they don't address like, you'll see a lot of them are quite short.
Mm.
So the things like which would have, like if you read them, would have been done within a few minutes. You'll see that they will mention things like, oh, and Ramadan is coming, this month is coming upon us, and may Allah likes it. But they're not individual about, oh, by the way, this week, like I came across this, or you know what's going on, and this tribe is doing this right now, and they're not like that. And three, they are quite very, they're not speeches, they're what you would say sermons. They're not like, like a speech. I think people wouldn't call their speech a sermon, generally speaking. But would you generally consider, don't you consider a sermon with much more etiquettes and much more protocol to it?
A sermon is a speech given by...
No, I know it's a speech, obviously, but we wouldn't call your speech a sermon.
So you call a sermon a speech?
Yeah, but that's not. But it's not then carrying each other, is it? It's just obviously a speech is obviously going to be speech. It's all going to consist of speech. But
a speech is something you deliver to a group of people.
Are you giving a sermon now or a speech?
Would you seriously classify your any speech as a sermon?
No, it's the other way around.
Exactly.
So it's the other way around there. So I have an example. A speech is just the general address to people.
Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't carry the same etiquette nor protocol, does it?
So, but a sermon is a speech, isn't it? It falls under that.
No, but nobody denied that. No, but that's why I said to you it would be more a sermon than just a speech.
Right, what are we denying?
Whereas, what I was trying to say to you is that most people would not describe the
sermon an address in a language which nobody understands. You wouldn't call that a sermon. It wouldn't be a sermon if I just came and spoke to you in French and no one spoke to you. Then it'd just be.
Why wouldn't it be a sermon? So you're telling me that sermons in Latin were not described as sermon? They did, like before the papal type of readdressing, where they changed the Latin. Sermons into local regional languages for Catholicism, they were all considered sermons. No, I mean, now it's not still back in Latin internationally, but the thing is that they only changed this not so long ago. When they changed this, they had the convention type of thing. But before that, it was just, they used to address people in whatever country just in Latin, and they used to call it a sermon. So I think it would definitely, if you look at the khutbah of the Prophet ﷺ, I would see definitely more of the sermon element than a general speech. Because the Prophet ﷺ did used to generally address people as well. And they were more casual. And so this is why I was saying that if you had to compromise one at the cost of the other, I would feel that the sermon would preponderate. So this is why, in my understanding, that would be the best way to do it. If you if you can't do it like that, then just make sure that there's some Arabic in there at least, either in the second sitting or just make sure there's Arabic in there. That's what I'd say.
What's a wa'az then?
Wa'az, like admonishment and like preaching in a way type of thing. Yeah.
So you're saying that the sermon or the speech will be classified?
The talk.
What's else? Should give the khutbah.
The address.
Isn't that long? generally speaking?
No, they weren't.
As long as it's halal, isn't it?
For the
It doesn't
Jummah.
matter.
And in fact, I would have thought they might be shorter because the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith that towards the end of time you will see that the khutbahs will become elongated and the salah would become short. And that was one of the signs of the hour. So, I mean, they're quite brief. I mean, they had admonishment in them. They had like fear Allah and do this, and they were very eloquent. But they weren't like going on and on. It wasn't like a 25-minute or 30-minute
So there'd
address.
be
Like
no
that.
issue if you actually gave no speech beforehand and you just gave a short sermon and prayed the salah.
No, wouldn't be an issue.
There'd be,
But I think you
would that be
would have
part of
lost
the
an
Sunnah
opportunity. You see, the difference now is what is from the Sunnah is that you do use common sense and you address a situation with its
Even
with,
in ibadat.
with yeah, like even in ibadat.
Kind of gone right. You use common sense,
No,
right?
no.
Just go
You see,
right.
what is from the Sunnah is that you do things with wisdom and insight. So where Muslims don't now attend masjids and they will only listen to you, let's say for a few minutes on a Jum'ah, and that now becomes a window. I feel it would not be from the Sunnah to forfeit that window just foolishly and think, well, oh, it's all right, don't worry, so what? Like, they don't understand me, but who cares? I think like it would be insightful, it would be wise to kind of optimize that window and to get some words across to them that they can understand and say that, look, encourage them to do stuff. And because that's, come on, think about it, that they ain't going to really otherwise turn up to the masjid, are they? So now they've turned up and you've got that window. So now, okay. The second khutbah as well is from the condition. So a khutbah consists of two, although there is some difference. Some Maliki, Ibn Habib al-Maliki said that the second one was just the sunnah and the first one. But generally the khutbah is a condition. Its manner is that you have a break in between and it has two parts to it. Okay, that's just to understand it simply.
You have to sit.
When you sit in between, yeah. So you kind of sit down. There's nothing specifically to say as you sit. You just take a few breaths and then you just stand up again.
It's in the masjid, they sit like they're praying salah.
Do they?
Yeah, sometimes they do.
The imams?
No, all the people.
No, I'm talking about the imam. So, but the khutbah must be done after zawal. Did we read this? قرأت هذا؟
ولا بد أن تكون بعد الزوال وقبل الصلاة وليس في الخطبة حد عند مالك أيضا ولا بد أن تكون مما تسميه العرب خطبة.
So this is another interest. So it must be after zawal, which is once the time for Jummah is kicked in, because it is an integral part of Jummah. And he mentions that Imam Malik doesn't have any specificity of what the khutbah must be, except it must be something which the Arabs call a khutbah. And they've mentioned, they give the definition, كل كلام يشتمل على أمر عظيم يسمى خطبة. That every speech which, here's the distinction, they say every speech which is about something, a great matter, or a matter of great importance, can be called a khutbah. But then they mention it must have something like some praising of Allah, ideally, sending blessings upon the Prophet ﷺ, and so on. Na'am.
ويستحب الطهارة فيهما.
Right, and it's good, ideally you should be in a state of wudu whilst you're giving the khutbah, although it's not necessary, because a person could technically kind of go off, do his wudu and come back, but really that shouldn't be the way to do things.
وفي وجوب القيام لهما تردد.
Na'am. The thing is, do you have to stand whilst you give the khutbah? Generally, the people will say that yes, you do. It is definitely from the sunnah to stand. So Ibn al-Arabi in his Arida says that the Prophet ﷺ always kind of consistently did that he stood for his khutbah. From this they understand, like Ibn al-Arabi says that it is wajib, and many others have said. Although from the Maliki, Abdul Wahhab al-Baghdadi, al-Baji, Ibn al-Qassar, they say that, look, there's no clear evidence that say it's wajib, but it's definitely a sunnah. But the point is that you should stand when you do it. Whether it's absolutely an obligation that can be questioned, I think, but it's definitely from the way of the Sunnah. Naam.
الرابع الإمام ومن صفته أن يكون ممن تجب عليه الجمعة احترازا من الصبي والمسافر وغيرهما ممن لم تجب عليهم.
It says, and the fourth condition is the Imam, and from his characteristics should be somebody who Jum'ah is obligatory upon, excluding people like children or travelers or other than them who are exempt from Jum'ah. So i.e. it must be somebody who shares the same obligation as you. Now.
ويشترط أن يكون المصلي بالجماعة هو الخاطب إلا لعذر يمنعه من ذلك من مرض أو جنون أو نحو ذلك ويجب انتظاره للعذر القريب على الأصح.
Right, so and it's a condition that the people praying with the jama'ah, the person praying with the khatib, right, is the imam. Right, and the reason they say that is because there's from looking at all of the athar from the Salaf, from beginning with the Prophet ﷺ, then the Sahaba, and the Khulafa al-Rashideen, and so on, we do not find ever that the Khatib was ghayrul Imam, was other than the Imam. So the Khatib was the Imam. Although people have sometimes started to do other than that, generally there is a strict emphasis on this. Unless they say there was a valid reason. So imagine all of a sudden, like, I don't know, like let's say he had some illness or he wasn't some valid reason, some reason he couldn't do it. Like let's say he was doing the khutbah, but all of a sudden now he's got to go somewhere, something's happened, then somebody else takes over. That's fine. But it shouldn't be planned like that. Okay? And he mentions, unless, obviously he gives examples of...
But all schools of thought say that, just Maliki, Imam Malik didn't.
I think it's more emphasized in the Maliki madhab, to be fair, because I have seen others practice that they sometimes have the khatib different to the... And the Maliki are quite... Yeah, and they change it with the Imam because the Imam might have better recitation and stuff like that. I've seen it, but generally it shouldn't be the... What we definitely know is it's from the Sunnah, and we should kind of stick to it. That's my understanding. Naam. Right, okay, I mean this is a different, some people say this going back to Sahnun and other ulama that look, if the Imam, for example, he was doing the khutbah and now he had to go off to the toilet or something, should we kind of wait for him or should we just set up another Imam to lead the salah? I mean if he was the khatib but now we're about to begin the salah, they say, just wait it out for him if it's going to be brief but just use your judgment at the time, but they say if it's brief, you should wait for him. Naam.
الخامس موضع الاستيطان ولا تقام الجمعة إلا في موضع يستوطن فيه ويكون محلا للإقامة يمكن المثوى فيه بلدا كان أو قرية.
This once again is coming back to it should be a residential area. The Jum'ah shouldn't be offered like in the deserts or in the wild. It should be in a residential type of area, whether it's a village, whether it's a town, whether it's a city, but it shouldn't be just like where people don't live. And that is where they have the hadith, which is in Musannaf Abdul Razzaq, that la jum'ata illa fi misrin jami', which Ibn Hazm and Ibn Hajar said was sahih. But na'am, and I know some people have questioned that there was, I think in Bukhari and Abu Dawood, about one of the Jum'ahs was offered in Jawathi, a place in Bahrain in the early days, and they're questioning whether that was a full residential place or not. But generally, this is the understanding. Now, I mean, it's a report. Sorry, it's not a hadith. It's a hadith in the sense it's just a report, but not from the Prophet ﷺ. But they report it as one of the first. Jum'ahs being, they say that أول جمعة جمعت بعد جمعة جمعت في مسجد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في مسجد عبد القيس بجواثي من البحرين. So that's it. So it's from actually Ibn Abbas رضي الله عنه. That's, let me see, it's from Musannaf Abdul Razzaq and it's from Ali رضي الله عنه. Yeah. لا جمعة إلا في مصر جامع. So that, once again, I mean, I think people have questioned it because obviously they question, I mean, that first of all, does it have to be a misr? And a lot of people have questioned that anyway. It doesn't have to be a city, it could be a village and so on. But the point is residential. That's how it should be. So it shouldn't just be in the wild somewhere, people just getting together, because if they are in the wild somewhere, they're most likely travelers anyway, and so. Naam. Hopefully.
أما آداب الجمعة فثمانية. الأول الغسل لها وهو سنة عند الجمهور. من شروطه أن يكون متصلا بالرواح. فإن اغتسل واشتغل بغداء أو نوم أعاد الغسل على المشروع.
So the first thing, these are from the etiquettes of Jum'ah that he's going to mention 8. That first of all, bathing before you go, like taking, having ghusl. And he mentions this is sunnah, by the way. And despite what other people have said about it being obligatory, you should do it really just, it should be kind of relatively connected to going to Jum'ah. Naam.
الثاني السواك.
Using miswak, brushing your teeth, it all comes under the same thing. It doesn't have to be actually miswak. Miswak, you can brush your teeth, you can use mouthwash to the extent that, you know, I'm just saying Ibn al-Arabi, Qadi Abu Bakr Ibn al-Arabi mentions that actually in his thing about the mouthwash and stuff like this. That was in about 900 years ago, so it's interesting. Naam.
الثالث حلق الشعر. الرابع
Okay, this shaving of the hair. I don't know where that comes in, but generally, I mean, they're speaking because this is the kind of thing that you see, because apparently it kind of sounds like, oh, they're speaking about the head here, but I mean, because generally it wasn't a custom of people to be kind of, you know like the bold look. It wasn't a custom of like the Arabs or the Salaf in the early days. So I mean, it's quite interesting, unless they're talking about generally just neatening up or other type of hair, because it wasn't. In fact, a lot of the Malikiya were quite against initially people kind of shaving their head. Unlike the Hanafi madhab, who actually recognized it. I think Tahawi recognizes it as being sunnah, but the others, the Maliki madhab, to the extent almost describe it as a bid'ah. And I think that's because they said if a person did it seeing it as a religious, like I'm doing something holy by shaving my head. But if you did it just generally out of style, then it's not a problem.
He explains it in the countryside. I think they mean like moustache hair and that kind of thing.
No, he mentions that, the sharib, and I think, but then that's not usually shaved, you see. That was the only thing that was kind of making me. But I think he may be also referring to, in my understanding, I think he may be referring to like from, it could include things like either trimming the tash, stuff like that. It could also include stuff like, I suppose, people around the private areas and stuff like this, and it could be referring to stuff like that as well. But na'am.
الرابع تقليم الأظافر.
Trimming your nails.
الخامس تجنب ما يتولد منه الرائحة الكريهة.
And this, once again, just common sense, avoiding anything which would kind of give a bad smell. And it shows the emphasis on presentation. It's so huge. Na'am.
السادس التجمل بالثياب الحسنة.
Dressing up in good clothes.
السابع التطيب لها.
Having, using perfume, cologne, stuff like this, taking out those. I mean, it shows that how much of a big deal this actually was. Na'am.
الثامن المشي لها دون الركوب إلا لعذر يمنعه من ذلك.
This, like walking to the masjid, it doesn't mean you can't really drive to the masjid, but what it's saying is that it's more rewarding. That's why they said this. Na'am.
وأما الأعذار المبيحة للتخلف عنها فمن ذلك المطر الشديد والوحل الكثير والمجذم الذي تضر رائحته بالجماعة والمرض والتمريض بأن يكون عنده من أهله مريضا كالزوجة والولد وأحد الأبوين وليس عنده من يعوله فيحتاج إلى التخلف لتمريضه ومن ذلك إذا احتضر أحد من أقاربه أو إخوانه.
Shukran. Those reasons by which you can actually end up missing Jum'ah, amongst them is rain, severe rain. This won't really count here in the UK, by the way, just in case you're like chilling. All right, because it's always raining here. It doesn't make a difference. But plus, we've got those type of like it's designed in such a way that it won't hopefully kind of block out the roads and stuff. But if it was really bad and the only way you could go to the masjid was by walking, then I suppose it's there. I mean,
snow then?
yeah, I mean, snow I think would be just the same. Yes, snow definitely, because it mentions mud. Was heavy rainfall. I mean, if that was the only way, and the only way you could go to read Jummah was by walking to the masjid, let's say, and you're going to be like drenched and you don't want to, I mean, you have that, I would say that reason still does count then in that case.
You could have floods then.
You could have
Severe rain, so it's flooding.
Yeah, flooding, but it doesn't even have to be flooding. I don't mean it has to be flooding. It could be, because the reason I was saying it doesn't count here, because most people would have access to cars and stuff like this here, so it wouldn't really affect you, like in the sense that you're getting out of your house into the car, out of the car into the masjid. So really the rain thing is absolutely minimal where it actually makes impact upon you. If you did have to actually walk it, and you were going to get drenched, and you didn't want to go. No, but it could be that, I'm just saying that I think, although they didn't have probably in that type of, not necessarily, but they had some things, obviously, they must have had certain type of like coverings, which they could have used as well. But the fact that, the reason is there, I'm just saying. If it's, but it can't be just always a little light drizzle and a person feels like, you know, what the hell. Wal-wahal, mud, obviously it mentions mujaddam, leprosy, which doesn't really count nowadays. Marad, illness, tamrid. Not only the fact that you're ill, but you are taking care of somebody else. And this is quite important as well. He says if he has somebody, بأن يكون عنده أحد من أهله, if a member of his family is ill and he's watching over them, it could be his wife, his child, one of his parents, and there's nobody to watch over them, so they need him, so he can miss Jum'ah to do that. And they say from that, if a person was close breathing his last few moments, right? It's interesting that, but sometimes you think, how do you know that they breathe? Or is that just in hindsight you think, oh yeah, he was? But I mean, but if a person was at that moment where you're thinking, oh no, any moment now, right, they're about to kick the bucket. So Imam Malik's fatwa was anybody that's in such a situation, they can watch over that person, they can miss Jum'ah to kind of stay with that person. Naam.
قال مالك في الرجل يهلك يوم الجمعة فيتخلف عنده رجل من إخوانه ينظر في شأنه لا بأس بذلك.
Or if the person did pass away, for example, and you were there now going to take care of that dead body and of the deceased, then you can do that and you can miss Jum'ah for it.
ومنها لو خاف على نفسه من ضرب ظالم أو حبسه أو أخذ ماله وكذلك المعسر يخاف أن يحبسه غريمه على الأصح.
So they say also, if a person feared a tyrant, or if somebody was going to rob them, or somebody was going to harm them in any way, they could kind of avoid Jum'ah because of that. And also they say if a person, also if a person was in debt, and they feared that the person, no, not that he's just there, but he might actually like detain them. Yeah. So if you fear Lloyd's TSB, the manager is going to be there as well, and you're thinking, well, I haven't really been paying that credit card thing. So, I mean, it's interesting though, the society, how it functioned, I suppose. But na'am.
ومن ذلك الأعمى الذي لا قائد له. أما لو كان له قائد أو كان ممن يهتدي للجامع بلا قائد فلا يجوز له التخلف عنها.
So, likewise, the blind person who they say who doesn't have a guide and he can't make it to the masjid. If he can make it to the masjid with a guide or without a guide, then he needs to go. Okay, and who will be? You know, sometimes, you know, when I was in Pakistan studying, came across seriously some people. This one person was a brother to a student of the same type of faculty. This is when I was doing my hifz, and they were, I think the entire family was kind of blind. They were kind of born with some type of disorder. And now the thing was that this guy would travel right through Pakistan on his own, like blind, and he knew the whole thing. Like, so he would come from different cities, he knew where to get off, he knew where to do this, he knew it, totally independent. Amazing. You know, like, I mean, one is a country like the UK, which you still think, okay, fair enough. Like, I mean, it's crazy. The roads are crazy. And he seriously, I remember he came from up in the northwest that time, came to Islamabad, came to meet his brother. I was with him, and we went out to get some food. And even at the place, and remember, this is his first time, but the way he would easily, like so easily manage himself, like he'd manage his food, he'd manage like everything, like we ordered some food, he knows how to set things in a certain way, and amazing though, subhanallah, like it really is, I don't think an eye-opener is the right word there, but it really is amazing. But, right, so the thing is here, what would be interesting is, what about guide dog? That would be interesting. A person said, I've got a guide dog, and could I take that to the masjid? Well. So basically, if there's a valid reason, look, if a person's stuck for something, even if it's at work, sometimes things come up at work. There's a particular thing where you can't make it to that Jummah for that particular reason. You know, one-off, somebody asked me the other day as well, look, this happens, you know, I've got this exam, I've got this. Look, it's common sense as well that, look, maslaha is there. That, you know, the deen isn't there to make your life awkward. Where things happen, all right, fair enough. You know, you'll have to just pray dhuhr and it's okay. I mean, don't go completely wild in trying to, I don't know, like, get yourself into so much trouble, and whereas the leeway was already there. You understand what I'm saying? And so it doesn't, the main thing is that we should treat the deen as something that complements our lifestyle. To the extent that some fuqaha said that, some of the Maliki actually, that if a person got married, he could miss Jum'ah. Like, to the extent, I don't know if you've heard that. Have you heard that? Yeah, they said that. And then within, as long as it fell within the first 7 days, which it would. The Jummah, which obviously it would, since it's 7 days. But so that's also a fatwa. So you kind of see the whole thing is about common sense, in a way of like, look, it's about maslaha. Don't go too weird, but do remember its importance at the same time. Now.
ويحرم السفر عند الزوال من يوم الجمعة على من تجب عليه الجمعة وكذلك يحرم عليه الكلام والنافلة والإمام يخطب.
Starting about those things which you shouldn't be doing, if it's Jummah and when it's going to be, let's say once Zawal is about to kick in, that means the Jummah time is about to kick in, and then a person says, I know, why don't I just go on a journey right now? Unless it was pre-planned and there was a reason to go, you shouldn't just go, then you should pray Jummah and then go. Likewise, once the Imam is doing the khutbah, you cannot speak, you cannot pray nafil either. Now.
سواء كان في الخطبة الأولى أو الثانية ويجلس الرجل ولا يصلي إلا أن يكون تلبس بنفل قبل دخول الإمام فيتم ذلك ويحرم البيع والشراء عند الأذان الثاني ويفسخ إن وقع.
Shukran. And regardless of whether the talking or the nafil is the first khutbah or the second khutbah, it's all one. So you're not allowed to talk, you're not allowed to tell people off, you're not allowed to really, should be attentive, should be listening, shouldn't be really texting away, shouldn't be doing stuff like this. This is why it may be ideal if the khutbah is quite brief, because people by their very nature will do these things. So,
It looks like really boring.
oh, I'm sorry. Is the deen not as entertaining for you?
That's the caravans.
We'll try and get some caravans to go by. Right, so.
Playing drums.
I mean, the thing is, this is why the khutbah should really be the Arabic one, and it should be kind of brief, because you don't want to be burdensome upon people. I know Sa'id ibn Jubayr used to say that if it was a he used to say if it's a tyrant doing the khutbah, then you don't have to listen to it. So he used to, on purpose during Hajjaj's, or not get up, but he used to just talk with his friends and stuff, like in Hajjaj's khutbah. He goes, I messed up their khutbah as well. But so obviously, that was one understanding. But one thing that ulama do say is in the khutbah, you know, when they start doing the dua and stuff, they start saying, if they start talking about the kings of the time, which they always do, so they start saying, oh Allah, bless our king, and do this and do that, which they always do. So at that point, they say that the obligation is removed though. So for that type of talk, you're not obliged to be, I mean, meaning you still listen to it, but if you did end up kind of like talking or looking at or whatever, the obligation wouldn't apply for that. That's what they, although they don't write about texting in the commentaries, but they yeah, because really they didn't like this, and I find it really nonsensical. I mean, I kind of hate it as well, to be honest with you. You know, with all this, the sucking up to the kings and all this that takes place throughout a lot of the Muslim world, and they kind of say, oh, our king and so, and do this for him and do that for him, and they say it in every khutbah. Traditionally, you did mention the Caliph's name, and it was also a way of letting all the Muslim world know who the Caliph was. And so, because it carried that function, because sometimes people never knew who's actually in power. Because it wasn't like today where you just check his blog. It's going to be like, Khalif's like, what did he tweet today? He goes, oh, just another day in my mansion with all my thousands of slaves and armies. And right. So the thing is that so what they would do is, one way they would know who's king or who's the ruler is listen to the khutbah. So they would mention his name. And so they would know. So it served a social function as well. But na'am.
ويكره ترك العمل يوم الجمعة وتنفل الإمام قبل الخطبة وكذلك يكره للجالس أن يتنفل عند الأذان الأول ويكره حضور الشابة للجمعة وكذلك السفر بعد الفجر والله أعلم.
Mentioned also that buying and selling is impermissible after the main adhan has taken place for Jum'ah. And that's because Allah says وَذَرُوا الْبَيْعَ. And this once again shows that the religiosity, the whole ritual element of the khutbah and everything. You can't buy nor sell, to the extent that the ulama say if you do, it's invalid. Basically, just don't do it. Simple as. I'm not saying if you happen to press click whilst the khutbah is going on, would that transaction be invalid or not? But what we're saying is that, look, it shouldn't be done. We should show respect to the khutbah and attentively listen. On the day of, they mention, this is interesting, on the day of Jum'ah, and actually Ashhab transmits from Imam Malik that this thing, that on the day of Jum'ah they would discourage and didn't like the fact that people took it off. But this is interesting. I want to share a little twist, I want to put a twist on this, is that this, what they're talking about, is different to our day and age, in the sense that the culture and the mindset has changed towards holidays. Holidays are a chilled out thing, which we see as a luxury and as a sense of enjoyment and to enjoy life and do things. Therefore, I wouldn't see that necessarily as a problem today. Not that I'm saying they should make Jummah the day off for them, but if they did, it wouldn't be a problem. They historically saw this tarkul amal as an act of worship. Like leaving work was an act of worship, that you are not allowed to work on this day because it's out of honoring God.
Like a Sabbath.
Like the Sabbath, and it came from that concept. So when people, you know, the Jews like, oh, we don't cook, we don't do this, we don't light fire, we don't do this, we don't do, or whether it was like the Christians in the sense that we don't work, we don't, you know, this is a day of just worshipping God, it's a day of just, that's our sacrifice to God. That isn't the concept that we carry today about holidays. People love holidays. So it's not about, so the whole mindset has changed, therefore this wouldn't apply today. Okay. Having said that, I don't know whether having Friday would be a good day to have as your public holiday, because I was in Pakistan when they actually changed it. Because in Pakistan it was actually Sunday, and then what happened is they flipped it to Friday, and this was, I think, during my hifth year, and they flipped it to Friday at one point, and it went, I think it went terribly wrong, because the problem is that, you see, what you don't understand is, you see, we don't see this as an act of worship, like in that sense. We see it as, okay, this is our day off, we've got to get our things done. So what happened is people now started hosting their weddings, and they started hosting their family functions and everything on the day off, which they're naturally going to do. So now it just meant, okay, people were just struggling with Jummah. Because first, they used to have their day off for that, and they used to still get time off for Jummah. Because people recognize, oh, you know, he's going for Jummah, he's got 2 hours here, he can go, whatever, get ready, or 1 hour, you can do his Jummah and come back. But now it was like, oh, but that's your day off, and so, but you got to get all your social stuff done as well. So it just became, it did not work well. And then they changed it back to Sunday. They realized it was a good change. So with that, he then mentions also, he says that, look, وَتَنَفَّلُ الْإِمَامِ قَبْلَ الْخُطْبَةِ, that the imam shouldn't start doing any nafal before the khutbah. Also, once the adhan is done, the person sitting shouldn't get up and start doing nafal because they should get ready for the khutbah. They mention that, what about young women attending the Jum'ah? They say that, oh, this could be discouraged based on the fact that they're talking about fitna, talking about the context, the society in which they're in. They also mention it's discouraged to travel after subah prayer. So if a person was going to travel on a Friday after subah prayer, once again, this being because in case in those societies people were going to be doing this to avoid Jum'ah, or they're making like a political statement by doing this, or they're doing something. In this day and age, nobody cares really in that sense. Like there's no type of like political protest by you not going to Jummah or anything. Simple thing is, you're going to pray Jummah if you believe and want to pray Jummah. So if you had to travel, then you had to travel. Okay, but with that, we've come to the end of Kitab al-Jum'ah and the end of today's dars. Next session we will have Salatul Janaza, followed by Kitab al-Siyam, the book of fasting. Jazakumullah al-khair. I think we've covered quite a bit, but alhamdulillah, I think it was good. We've got an extensive amount done. If there's any questions, we'll have some quick refreshments, and then inshallah we can shoot.
The discussion, he doesn't mention eating and drinking.